Hey, welcome back, folks. Great to see you on this Monday. Got an update for you on a historic winter storm through the Gulf Coast of Texas, through Louisiana, Mississippi, and into the Florida Panhandle. In fact, impacts even going to be felt up through the Carolina coastline, where we could see accumulating snow and ice. Now, if you're new to the channel, welcome in. My name is Gerald. I'm a meteorology major at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And if you haven't already, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and hit that bell for the latest notifications. That'll keep you up to date with the latest model guidance and a breakdown of that guidance as we continue to track what has been a very busy January and could stay that way as we go through the end of the month. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and dive right on into the data. So what you see next to me, these are surface temperatures over the past day or so, and you can see ingredient number one for that winter conditions is that very cold Arctic air. You can see it working southward, really started over the weekend, but really got through most of us by last night and into this morning. Low temperatures out there this morning, you can see, are at very low numbers. We'll move it all the way ahead. We're down into the 20s, into the Carolinas. We're into the teens in Birmingham, through much of Mississippi, even into Little Rock, seeing those teens for a low. And we've got freezing temperatures all the way to the Gulf Coast. That's what's going to set up shop for that big time winter weather potential. It's just not often that we get an air mass of this magnitude this far south. It's kind of one of those once in a year kind of air masses. And then if you can actually time it up with a storm, which is not something that happens very often, you get that once in a maybe even generation type snow event for portions of the deep south. So that's what we're going to talk about. Now, another thing that this very cold air is going to be kind of guilty of causing is big lake effect snow up here into portions of Michigan, into Pennsylvania, New York State, even into Ontario. We're going to see very high totals, and we're going to talk about that as well in today's video. Now, this is the latest winter storm impact index from the Weather Prediction Center. You can see those impacts setting up in those areas I mentioned. Notice up here into Michigan and specifically New York State, into the Tug Hill, back down near Buffalo, a big lake effect snow impacts, and then through the deep south. We're going to see major impacts into Louisiana, back down towards the Houston area, even into the Florida Panhandle. Again, it's just not often that we see a winter storm impact map kind of including areas like that. And then even some impacts along the Carolina coast, potentially back down near the Charleston area, up towards Myrtle Beach, and maybe the Outer Banks of North Carolina, getting in on some of that wintry mischief. Although, a little spoiler alert, once we get towards about this area in the forecast, it becomes quite tricky, and I'll talk about why whenever we get to that segment of the video. So definitely stay tuned. Now, the other thing are those current alerts out there. You can see the map really filling in. And again, we talk about historic. This is a historic alert map in itself. It's not very often that you could drive from the Texas-Mexico border all the way up through Houston, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, loop back around to Pascagoula, into Mobile, and then into Destin, and not leave a winter storm warning. And then you could drive all the way to Charleston from there and not leave a winter storm watch. It's just really just not something we see very often, but we're seeing it out there with this very cold air mass and that combination of Gulf moisture, leading to quite an historic map. And then some other things to note up here is into the lake effect regions. We have winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings. And for some reason, they're not showing up, but we have lake effect storm warnings here into the Tug Hill and into the Buffalo area. And then also some northwest flows still bringing snow into the mountains of North Carolina and up through West Virginia. And then the leftovers of our nor'easter from yesterday beginning to pull out, but still some leftover advisories up that way as well. All right, so let's go ahead and start by talking about this lake effect, because I haven't talked about you folks up here very much. We've been busy with a nor'easter that we had and the big southern storm, but now that the nor'easter is moving out of here, let's mention you folks up in the Midwest who are getting in on that lake effect snow. So this afternoon, lake effect going to really pick up into the state of Michigan, especially those western shores, the usual places, and up into the UP. And it'll kind of just be a nonstop thing throughout the day today. This is overnight tonight. And you see those lake effect streamers continuing even into Tuesday morning. Then we get through Tuesday afternoon, and the lake effect continues. Even a little bit of a clipper system trying to work on into Minnesota. Not a big deal, but could bring some light snow, some flurries, snow showers, things like that. And then that kind of gets on into Wisconsin. This gets us into overnight Tuesday into Wednesday. By the way, I'll remind you, time right above my head so you can see it there. So not a big deal outside of the lake effect, but we will see some pretty good totals from that. And then we get into the Northeast here. And like I said, beginning to see that nor'easter pull away. Let me know how much snow you saw, by the way. If you got snow yesterday out of that storm, I'd love to hear a final measurement from you and your location. That's always good and helps me kind of gauge who got the worst of it and who kind of maybe got spared a little bit. But this afternoon, lake effect really increasing. I think the place to get hit the hardest out of this is going to be the Tug Hill of upstate New York. The reason for that is you see these isobars, you see the orientation that they're following. Well, the wind here is basically coming out right like this. So it's going to cross basically parallel right over Lake Ontario here, and that will give a high impact lake effect event. It's always very important when forecasting lake effect, what we call a fetch. The fetch is basically the distance over a body of water that the wind travels. So the higher the fetch, the more moisture the lake effect has to work with, and generally the more instability and just the worse of a time you're going to have if you're not a lake effect snow lover. Now, you can see this afternoon that big streamer off of the Tug Hill continuing into this evening, even some snow into Ontario. I know we've got some folks up here in Canada watching right into this region. Going to see some snow showers this afternoon and into this evening as that lake effect cranks up. Overnight tonight, it continues. It is just absolutely dumping snow there into the Tug Hill. In fact, we're going to see totals more than a foot, maybe more than 2 feet, with drifts even higher than that out of this event. This gets us to tomorrow morning. The Tug Hill still just completely blasting away heavy snow. Other than that, pretty dry through the northeast. But then we get to Tuesday afternoon, just a tiny little shortwave piece of energy could produce some light snow showers into Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and kind of surrounding areas there of the Appalachia chain. Maybe picking up a little bit of light snow Tuesday afternoon. And then we get through the end of the period. This is 48 hours or guess really more like 40 hours from now into the overnight of Tuesday into Wednesday, and it's still snowing in the Tug Hill. So when all is said and done, how much snow can we expect? Well, let's start out here into Michigan and Wisconsin and areas out here. Nothing for the Ohio Valley. Again, this is just a lake effect event, but if you're on the western shores of the thumb of Michigan here, NWS going for about half a foot of snow for most folks there along the shoreline, and even, up to maybe 20, 30, 40 miles inland from the shore, especially up here into the upper bit of the thumb here, could see even half a foot to a foot of snow. Another high-end area is going to be the eastern northern side of the peninsula on the shoreline there, half a foot to a foot of snow, and even some snow out on the western side, but probably a little bit less, more in that 5 to 6, maybe even 4 to 6 range for total snowfall. All right, moving it further to the east here, the forecast from the National Weather Service. Again, most of this has already fallen. In fact, really all of this has already fallen into Maine, so just ignore that. That's from your nor'easter last night. That has pulled out of here, but snow to come into the Tug Hill. I mean, folks, this is 2-3 feet of snow right into the heart of this band. So definitely, worth mentioning. And then down near the Buffalo area, just south of Buffalo, could also get a foot or so of snow out of this setup. And then you see some of that northwest flow snow down into the mountains of West Virginia as well, out of this event. But that sets up the stage for what is the next big story, and the one that I'm sure most of you are here for probably, is that southern snow and ice storm of historic proportion. So I talked a little bit about this earlier. Why is this historic? And, I don't really throw these words out just to throw them around. I think this really will be a historic event. Now, it's also an important caveat. This will not be historic for everyone. If you're watching in South Carolina, North Carolina, there are scenarios that this could be historic, but those scenarios are kind of dwindled down a little bit at this point and a lot less likely than maybe more of a normal winter storm for you. But this will not be normal for areas of Louisiana. Generally down here in the I-10 corridor, Baton Rouge into New Orleans, and really just the whole I-10 corridor of the state of Louisiana there, through all of the parishes, a big winter storm would be an inch or two of snow. That's big down here. And you start talking half a foot of snow, that is a crippling historic winter storm. And just to give you perspective, the last time New Orleans saw measurable snow was 2009, and that was less than an inch of snow. In fact, I think it was less than half an inch of snow. So, you start thinking 2009, I mean, that's a while ago, folks. That's 16 years ago. If you were born in 2009, you can drive now. That's how long it's been since we've seen really any sort of snow in New Orleans, and we could double, triple, quadruple those numbers. So that's why this is an historic event. Now, let's talk about the kind of ingredients behind it in the upper levels and what is making this such a historic event, and why this is also a tough event to forecast for areas of the Carolinas. So like we said earlier, we've got the cold air in place. That's here. That's not going to be a problem. That's diving all the way down south to the Gulf Coast. It's just very cold in here. And then what's happening on the outer edge of kind of that cold air, we've got this little piece of energy that is digging down to the south and going to swing on through. And I always talk about this in my videos. Here is the trough. Here is the center of it. And always on the right-hand side, this is an area of lift in the atmosphere that precipitation wants to form. You get that, and then you add on top of that, it's right over the Gulf of Mexico, which is already a very unstable area due to what we call baroclinic instability. That's a good recipe for a lot of precipitation to fall into that Arctic air mass over these Gulf areas of Louisiana and Texas. And that's where, again, this will be more of a historic impact. Now, this is why the forecast gets tough into the Carolinas. The same reason, or same kind of trough orientation here. So we get divergence on this side. Well, on the opposite side, you get convergence or sinking motion in the atmosphere. And that creates kind of the opposite effect. Instead of a lot of rising motion, you get sinking motion. You're thinking, all right, well, why is that a problem? The reason that's a problem is we kind of really have two troughs here. If you look at it, there's a strong little trough here, and then another shortwave trough down to the south. So we've got divergence on this side of this trough, but we've got convergence on the other side of our northern trough. So if I move this ahead, notice the problem we're going to run into right around here. That convergence back on this side is beginning to sink southward towards the Carolinas, the same side, or at the same time, that our divergence is trying to work in. So they're trying to kind of counteract each other, and the models are really having a field day at trying to figure this one out. If the divergence wins out, then we're going to get a much bigger storm than some of the models suggest, from the Outer Banks back down into the low country of South Carolina and southern Georgia. If the models are a little more right and this convergence up here is a little heavier and a little stronger, then we're going to get a much more limited winter weather event down here, like some of our models are currently suggesting. I'll tell you now, though, time and time again, it has happened that the models are kind of wrong in a setup like this. They say, all right, the convergence is going to overdo it, and then, in fact, it's the other way around, and the divergence overdoes it, and we get a big storm instead of nothing. They also get it wrong the other way sometimes, but right now, they're kind of showing a lot more of a light winter weather event once you get past really Alabama and the Florida Panhandle into Georgia and the Carolinas, because of that upper level feature that is kind of throwing havoc on the forecast. Now, with that said, let's go and dive into some data and start showing you some of the latest here from our models. This is the latest high-resolution rapid refresh model. Again, a time above my head, and we'll kind of play this out. So the storm's beginning today, folks. Already seeing some light snow into the Texas and Oklahoma Panhandle, even down into southern Kansas. Not a big deal, but if that quickly accumulates, it's not going anywhere because it's very cold out there. So do be aware of that if you are driving in that area. Now, then we get ahead into this evening. Probably some light drizzle, light rain going to begin to break out over the Houston metro, really through much of South Texas in general. And you might be thinking, well, where is this storm I was promised? Well, don't worry. Here comes the cold air as that evaporation begins, and we get an all-out ice storm beginning into the Houston metro, back down south through the Gulf Coast of Texas. Those pink and purple colors, that's sleet, freezing rain, and then the snow is in blue here. And eventually, the cold air is expected to win out, and we're going to change over to a big, heavy snow event by tomorrow morning. This is right around the time the sun is coming up. You can see that heavy snow beginning in Houston, getting down into the state of Louisiana along that I-10 corridor, even into New Orleans by later tomorrow morning. We've got heavy snow in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, through the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, and just, again, not something that you see very often here as the storm continues to really crank up. And then we get through Tuesday afternoon, the snow begins to dwindle down, the snow and ice dwindling down in Texas, still snowing good in southern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, along the Gulf Coast there into the Gulfport area, Pascagoula, into Mobile, Alabama, seeing snow begin to fall here by Tuesday afternoon and continues into the afternoon hours, and then by the evening begins to wind down across Louisiana from west to east. And I think by the time the sun is down and we kind of hit that 10 p.m. hour, so we should be all done. It'll be time to pick up the pieces, or really shovel out the pieces, probably more like it, in the area. Now, the $1 million question is how much of what is going to fall from the sky, and that's always the fun part to talk about, so let's talk about it. We'll start with ice first, because, again, the storm is going to start as ice and then change over to snow, and I think the biggest icing concerns is really going to be into Texas. This could be one of those events that it's very briefly ice into Baton Rouge and New Orleans, but probably a longer period of ice back into Houston. Maybe a couple hours. That could accrete to a 1/10 of an inch of ice or so in spots, more like a glaze to a 1/10 of an inch. Isolated spots back here into extreme South Texas, a little bit more ice where we're going to struggle to change over to snow. this area circled on your map could see more of a 1/10 of an inch to a 1/4 of an inch of ice. That'd be more of a significant icing event than what we probably see closer towards the Louisiana line. So definitely going to be some ice to worry about, but the really historic part is this map. This is the snow. This is the forecast straight from the National Weather Service. Let's start into Texas. The highest snowfall totals are going to be just north of the Houston metro, a corridor in here of 1 to 3 inches of snow. I would include the city of Houston in that. I think you get about an inch, maybe a couple of inches of snow in the city. Outside of there in Texas, it's going to be more of an icing event. So really more of a dusting of kind of some sleet and ice and snow kind of mess there further towards the south and to the west there once you get back down towards the Galveston area. Then the historic stuff begins in Louisiana. Check out this forecast again, folks. This is straight from the experts. They're going for 3 to 6 inches of snow here from Baton Rouge along the entire I-10 corridor of Louisiana. Down into New Orleans, they're going for about 1 to 3 inches. They're forecasting about 2.5 or so. I think that's a pretty realistic number. It's just crazy stuff that you do not see very often. In fact, it's possible somebody in here, again, I'll kind of circle the area right in here. It is possible somebody gets 1/2 foot or more of snow deep down into the swamps of Louisiana. So I've continued to make the jokes, but just imagine the alligators with 1/2 foot of snow on top of them. Yeah, that's why we're calling this historic. It's just not something that you see very often, potentially maybe never seen by anyone that lives here in this part of the country. Very kind of historic storm for sure. And then you get down into Louisiana, into Mississippi rather. That area also going to get a good little 2 to 4 inch snow event there into the deep south portions of Mississippi. It's crazy. We're always normally tracking tornadoes down here. This time we're tracking winter weather. It's kind of like everything's flipped around a little bit. All right, let's time it out further ahead into time. We kind of stopped here Tuesday evening, but here we go. Tuesday afternoon, snow now beginning to break out, like I said, in southern Alabama, maybe up as far north as Auburn, Montgomery. We've got snow in the western Florida Panhandle, Destin, Panama City Beach, and kind of the Pensacola area, seeing some of those flakes begin to fly here by the time we get to Tuesday evening. Now, this is when the forecast gets tricky. Up to this point, we're pretty confident. We're going to get a nice little band of snow into southern Alabama, the western panhandle of Florida, and even southwestern Georgia. Now, once we get to the kind of eastern half of Georgia up into the Carolinas, that's when the forecast goes haywire a little bit. This model, the HRRR, I think doing an okay job here, pushes that band of precip up north. All of South Georgia gets in on a nice little burst of some snow, even southern South Carolina into the low country, kind of south of Columbia here, down towards Orangeburg, Sumter, Beaufort, into Tybee Island, seeing some snow here. This would be the evening of Tuesday into Wednesday, again, time right above my head. And then gets that snow into Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Wilmington, but then kind of misses the Outer Banks a little bit. And you'll notice as the map kind of gets to the end of the run here, we even get some heavy snow, ice, sleet kind of mixed down into Charleston, down into South Georgia, and through the Florida Panhandle, but nothing in Columbia, not really anything in Florence or Fayetteville or even much in Augusta, Atlanta. This corridor right here, just to the north of it. Now, that could change. Again, I told you the forecast is tricky. If the models are overdoing that upper level kind of crunch on the snow, then this could get expanded a little bit further inland. Now, places like Greenville, Spartanburg, Asheville, up into the Triad, it's going to take a real miracle to get much out of this, but places like Columbia, Fayetteville, the southeastern side of Charlotte, areas like Monroe, kind of up into the I-95 corridor of North Carolina, you're still in play. Even if the models are not showing a lot right now, I would still consider you to be in play with the storm. Same thing for a place like Augusta and the southern suburbs of Atlanta. It's a tough forecast, so just stay tuned. And you can see that with the next model I show you. This is the European model. We'll move it ahead a little bit further north with that snow shield. Tuesday afternoon does clip Augusta, Columbia, the southeastern side of Charlotte with some light snow. And then kind of similar into the coastal areas, gets I-95 eastbound in North Carolina with some light snow into the Outer Banks, and showing some pretty good totals here out of it as that works through. This will be overnight Tuesday. A pretty quick hitting storm on this one. A heavier snow at the coast from Charleston into Myrtle Beach, Wilmington on the European here. Another thing to know on the European is doesn't get that snow and ice as far south into North Florida here along the I-10 corridor there. Once you go from Jacksonville over to maybe about Greenville, Florida, that kind of area. Another tough forecast. We've got snow and ice on the mesoscale models, more rain on the global models. But I will say, generally speaking, that low-level cold air wins out. So I would still go ahead and expect some sort of ice kind of mix, at least down in that area, maybe even as far east as Jacksonville. Not out of the question to see some wintry weather fly come Tuesday night. All right, so same story here. What about totals? And again, the forecast gets tricky here. Feeling pretty good. I'll go ahead and circle an area. I feel pretty good about the forecast. Right into here, southern Alabama, into the extreme western portion of the Florida Panhandle. I'll go ahead and say a nice little 1 to 3 inch snow event here on the beaches of the Florida Gulf Coast. Again, just not something you see very often. So that's something I feel pretty good about happening. Now, where the forecast goes awry, again, is right into this area of the Carolinas, southern Georgia, southern South Carolina, into the low country, especially places like Augusta and Columbia. It could be as little as nothing falls from the sky to as much as an inch or so of snow begins to accumulate on the ground. And obviously, those are big differences. One is no school closure the next morning. The other one is you don't have school the next day. So it's going to be a very tough forecast right into this area of Columbia, Augusta, back out towards Wadesboro, that US 74 corridor, kind of between Charlotte and Fayetteville. It's a really tough forecast. Now, I do feel pretty confident we'll get some winter weather here into the low country of South Carolina, even down into Savannah, Tybee Island. I'm again going to stick to a 1 to 3 inch snow event down here. I think that's pretty likely. Maybe a sleet snow fest with some freezing rain kind of mixed in there, but nonetheless winter weather. And then you look at the icing concern down here, and you'll notice, again, this is where the higher ice concern is going to be into North Florida and extreme southeastern Georgia, including the Savannah area. Some of that ice even trying to get up into Charleston, Myrtle Beach. I think really more of a Charleston point southward icing event, though, down here into the Panhandle, where we could see a 1/10 of an inch, up to maybe as much as isolated spots getting a 1/4 of an inch. And I was watching Mitch West's video last night. Sorry, if y'all don't know Mitch, I'm sure most of you do. He's a great YouTuber and a great guy. He was talking about something, very good point that I didn't even realize down here or think about. We have a lot of tree damage in this area from Helene and other hurricanes from the past couple of years. So you add some ice on there, it might not take much to bring some power lines and some trees down into this region, excuse me. So that's something to monitor down that way. Now we'll move it up the coast a little bit. Snow chances up this way, the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Again, it's such a tough forecast. I'm going to stick to my guns, and I'd say kind of this area I have circled in here still gets 1 to 3 inches, but I will go ahead and warn you, you could also get nothing in here. The models really are struggling big time. I showed you the difference between the two. One shows snow, the other one shows basically nothing in the Outer Banks, but I think you'll get at least some sort of winter weather out here. Raleigh, kind of on the same story as like Fayetteville. You're on the edge of anything significant happening. I'd say less likely we get significant, I'd say less likely we get really much anything in Raleigh, especially anything significant I think would be really unlikely. Charlotte, pretty unlikely. Triad, pretty unlikely. But once you get back towards I-95 and towards the coast, that's where the chances of snow become much more likely, even if it's not as high of an event as what we're going to see in Louisiana, where they're going to get half a foot or so. It's looking more like a 1 to 3 inch event here. Still great for those folks along the beach that really just don't see winter weather very often, especially a place like Myrtle Beach, who in 2018 really got robbed and didn't get much of anything. So if you live down there, this could finally be your storm that we kind of break the streak and get some accumulating snowfall. All right, final thing I'll talk about here. These are temperatures, and because I think this is very important, let's skip this ahead. This is Wednesday afternoon, so this is the day after all the snow and ice is done. It is still very cold down here, so a lot of that stuff is not going to melt immediately. It's going to take some time. This is, again, Wednesday afternoon. You see the departure from normal, the anomaly. We're still 20, 30 degrees below average in these coastal areas, and that continues all the way into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, into the weekend. And then I think we finally warm up by about Saturday, Sunday. So just be prepared for it's going to take time for these roadways to clear out. One, you're low on plows and stuff down here in the Gulf Coast, obviously. And two, it's going to be kind of cold after this time period for a little bit as well. But I think once we start getting towards the weekend, things should clear up and we should get a little bit better off. Also, luckily, the further south you are, the more that sun angle is going to help in places like New Orleans, Houston, and the Florida Panhandle. Obviously, it's not the middle of Iowa where the sun barely comes up above the horizon. So that is the good news there. Alrighty, folks. Well, that is all I got for you. Again, I will ask if you haven't already and you made it this far in the video, go ahead, like it, subscribe, and hit that bell for the latest notifications, and come back tonight for another update on the storm. All right, y'all have a great one. Stay safe, stay warm, and I'll see you all next time.